karuna. Oh yeah. Okay. Translation. He who brought the treasure of divine love and who was filled with compassion and mercy, where has such a personality as Advaita Acharya gone? Where are my Swarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatan? Where is Raghunath Das, the savior of the fallen? Where are my Raghunath Bhatta and Gopal Bhatta? And where is Krishna Das Kaviraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great dancer, suddenly go? I will smash my head against the rock and enter into fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all wonderful qualities? Being unable to attain the association of Lord Gauranga, accompanied by all these devotees, in whose association he performed his pastimes, Narottama Das simply weeps. Jayanilo Premadhana Karuna Pracho. Jayanilo Premadhana Karuna Pracho. Prabhu Kotagila Acharya Thakur. Prabhu Kotagila Acharya Thakur. Pat Brahmamsa Parivajikacharya Ashtatusha Shri Shrimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnu Pat Brahmamsa Parivajikacharya Ashtatusha Shri Shrimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. The Disappearance Day of Srila Ramananda Roy Ki Jai. All glories to the Summa devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the Summa devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the Summa devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So we can pull up Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, chapter 10, verse 134. Adi 10, 134. 134, 134. Okay. E Pancha Putra Tomar Mor Priya Patra Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra E Pancha Putra Tomar Mor Priya Patra Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra E Panchaputra Tomar Mor Priya Patra Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra E Panchaputra Tomar Mor Priya Patra Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra. Please repeat.
E Panchaputra Tomara Mora Priya Patra.
E Panchaputra Tomar Mor Priya Patra.
Ramananda Saha Mora Deha Bheda Patra.
Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra.
E Panchaputra Tomar Mora Priya Patra.
E Panchaputra Tomar Mor Priya Patra.
Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra.
Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra. E Panchaputra Tomar Mor Priya Patra.
E Panchaputra Tomar Mora Priya Patra.
Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra.
Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra.
E Panchaputra Tomar Mora Priya Patra.
E Panchaputra Tomar Mor Priya Patra.
Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Mantra.
Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra.
Mataji's.
E Panchaputra Tomara Mora Priya Patra.
Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra.
E Panchaputra Tomara Mora Priya Patra. Ramananda Saha Mora Deha Bheda Matra.
E Panchaputra Tomar Mor Priya Patra. Ramananda Saha Mor Deha Bheda Matra. These
Pancha,
five
Putra,
Putra
sons, Tomar, your, Mora, mine, Priya Patra,
Priya Patra.
very dear,
Very dear.
Ramananda Saha, with the Sri Ramananda Roy, Mora, mine, Deha Bheda,
Veda.
bodily difference,
Bodily difference.
Matra,
Matra.
only. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told Bhavananda Roy, "Your 5 sons are all dear devotees. Ramananda Roy and I are one, although our bodies are different." Purport: the Gora Gonodesha Deepika states that Ramananda Roy was formerly Arjuna. He is also considered to have been an incarnation of the Gopi Lalita, although in the opinion of others he was an incarnation of Vishaka Devi. He was a most confidential devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, "Although I am a sannyasi, my mind is sometimes perturbed when I see a woman. But Ramananda Roy is greater than me, for he is always undisturbed, even when he touches a woman. Only Ramananda Roy was endowed with the prerogative to touch a woman in this way. No one should imitate him. Unfortunately, there are rascals who imitate the activities of Ramananda Roy. We need not discuss them further." Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's final pastimes, Ramananda Roy and Swarup Damodar, always engaged in reciting suitable verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam and other books to pacify the Lord's ecstatic feelings of separation from Krishna. When Lord Chaitanya went to southern India, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya advised him to meet Ramananda Roy, declaring that there was no devotee as advanced in understanding the conjugal love of Krishna and the gopis. While touring South India, Lord Chaitanya met Ramananda Roy by the bank of the Godavari. And in their long discourses, the Lord took the position of a student. Ramananda Roy instructed him. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu concluded these discourses by saying, "My dear Ramananda Roy, both you and I are madmen, and therefore we meet intimately on an equal level." Lord Chaitanya advised Ramananda Roy to resign from his government post and come back to Jagannath Puri to live with him. Although Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu refused to see Maharaj Prataparudra because he was a king, Ramananda Roy, by a Vaishnava scheme, arranged a meeting between the Lord and the king. This is described in Madhya Lila, chapter 12, verses 41 through 57. Sri Ramananda Roy was present during the water sports of the Lord after the Ratha Yatra festival. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu considers Sri Ramananda Roy and Sri Sanatana Goswami to be equal in their renunciation. For although Sri Ramananda Roy was a grahasta engaged in the government service, and Sri Sanatana Goswami was in the renounced order of complete detachment from material activities, they were both servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead who kept Krishna in the center of all their activities. Sri Ramananda Roy was one of the 3.5 personalities with whom Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu discussed the most confidential topics of Krishna consciousness. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu advised Pradyumna Mishra to learn the science of Krishna from Sri Ramananda Roy. As Subal always assisted Krishna in his dealings with Radharani in Krishna Lila, so Ramananda Roy assisted Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his feelings of separation from Krishna. Sri Ramananda Roy was the author of the Jagannath Vallabha Nataka. Om Agyana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Putale Swayam Upakata Mayam Dadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Tatpadakamadam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Jivam Sadhuitam Savadutam Prijna Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhudina Bandhav Jagat Pate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostite Tapta Kansara Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshware Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamame Hare Pare Vanshakapatu Vyasha Kripasanu Bhivacha Padita Nam Pavane Vyo Vaishnava Vyo Namo Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Paturesh Mati Bhakti Vikasa Swamine Namane Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Patulesh Mati Bhakti Vedanta Swamine Namane Namaste Sarasvati Devi Gauravani Prishtarne Nevishesha Shunamati Paschatya Dishatarne Puter Mahadbiri Mafpur Bibor Nirmaya Shati Yadamushi Purasha Bhunkti Gunan Shurasha Shatmaka Solam Krishishta Bhagavan Vachamsi Me.
Which one is the second?
I think this is the next one we're gonna do. This is this verse?
No.
Or
No, the verse you just chanted.
that's
Second
I think
canto.
that's the second
The
canto. It's in these
middle
prayers
one,
actually. I think that's the next one we're going to chant.
Okay.
So today is the very auspicious disappearance day of Srila Ramananda Roy. Srila Prabhupada, as we read in the purport, has explained many things about Ramananda Roy. He's a very prominent devotee, and I don't think maybe more than half of us haven't read Chaitanya Charitamrita here. But maybe at least we've read Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, or at least a small book, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we all probably have some idea of who Ramananda Roy is. So Ramananda Roy is a very intimate devotee of Lord Chaitanya. It's very significant in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. It's mentioned here that Lord Chaitanya had 3.5 very confidential devotees with whom he only spoke, or only with those devotees did he talk about the intimate pastimes, confidential pastimes of Krishna with. That was Shiki Mahiti, his sister, half a person,
Malati Devi.
Malati Devi Dasi, then Swarup Damodar Goswami, and then, of course, Ramananda Roy. So Ramananda Roy, he was a governor of Madras in southern India, but he was also, he was very intelligent. He was a scholar of Sanskrit. He was a poet. He was expert in drama from all fields, practically, materially and spiritually. Ramananda Roy was qualified in every respect. As we read in the purport, when after Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu converted Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he had told him, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya told Lord Chaitanya that you won't find a devotee who's more conversant or more expert in the mellows of conjugal love, of Madhurya Ras, than this Ramananda Roy of Madras. So, this verse I just read, it comes in the Adi Leela describing Lord Chaitanya's devotees. In the verse previous to this, there's one, Ramananda Roy, Patanyaka Gopinath, Kalaniti, Sudhaniti, Nayana Vaninat. So the Ramananda Roy was the son of Bhavananda Roy. So the 5 sons of Bhavananda Roy were Ramananda Roy, Patanayaka Gopinath, Kalanidhi, Sudhanidhi, and Nayaka Vaninath. So if you're familiar with Chaitanya Charitamrita, you will recognize some of these names. Again, Bhavananda Roy was very dear to Lord Chaitanya, and the Antya leader, his pastimes were Patanayaka Gopinath getting in trouble with embezzling government funds. So all these 5 sons is described elsewhere in the same Adi Leela, that they're so Bhavananda Roy is the incarnation. Actually, Lord Chaitanya, he tells Bhavananda Roy, you're just like King Pandu, and your 5 sons are just like the 5 Pandavas. And so we understand that all these, although it's not specifically given all these names or who all these brothers are, it's given specifically that Ramananda Roy, he is an incarnation. Well, there's differing opinions. The Gaura Gunodesha Deepika, it gives differing opinions. Some people consider him an incarnation of Lalita Devi, some as Vishaka Devi, and others still consider him an incarnation of Arjuna. And then elsewhere, sometimes you'll hear that he was half Arjuna, or like, he was simultaneously an incarnation of Arjuna and of one of these gopis, Vishaka, typically. So yes, that's there. It's a very bewildering situation. But just as Arjuna, at least during Krishna's later pastimes, is described in Arjuna says himself in the first canto that we were always together. They would even sleep together. They would sleep. They would sleep in the same room, but the same bed. So similarly to Ramananda Roy and the later pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was right there with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu every single day. Specifically, I'll kind of get into it a little bit later, but Lord Chaitanya, he would express feelings of separation from Krishna, especially when he quit or stopped touring southern India and he settled down in Jagannath Puri. He would experience during the day. It's described there in Chaitanya Charitamrita. He would go on with his normal bodily activities, but these were going on almost as if automatically, and Lord Chaitanya was bewildered. Was oblivious to it, but still, it looked like externally he was behaving like a normal person. But at night, Lord Chaitanya would experience such great, intense anxiety and pain and separation from Krishna. And only these 3 confidential devotees, specifically is mentioned there that although we don't have so much information about Shiki Mahiti and his sister, we do, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, at least from what I've read, there's extensive information of how Swarup Damodar Goswami or Ramananda Roy would both console Lord Chaitanya at night by reciting by hearing Lord Chaitanya speak, but also by speaking to Lord Chaitanya, understanding the mood of Lord Chaitanya, and reciting appropriate verses and singing appropriate songs. Specifically, although they would both do both, Swarup Damodar Goswami, he had a very sweet voice, and he was a very expert singer. And so with Swarup Damodar Goswami, he would sing Vaishnava songs. He would sing songs such as Gita Govinda, these elevated songs, the songs of Vidyapati, Chandidas as well, etc. And then Jayadev as well, and then Ramananda Roy, he would recite various verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam as well as other literatures dealing with the pastimes of Krishna. And in this way, they would understand Lord Chaitanya would be expressing some sentiment of separation, and Ramananda Roy, or Swarup Damodar Goswami as well, understanding that mood, would recite an appropriate verse or sing an appropriate song, and in this way console and enhance the mood of Lord Chaitanya and facilitate his pastimes, facilitate Lord Chaitanya tasting the mellows of devotional service. So I'll speak a little bit more about that later. But so initially, of course, he was the governor of Madras, but they met Lord Chaitanya on the bank of the Godavari River. Now, initially, it's described there. I think this comes in Madhya Lila, if I'm not sure, somewhere there, that initially Lord Chaitanya, he saw Ramananda Roy, and immediately he could recognize Ramananda Roy. Even though he's a Roy, he's a governor, he's a very opulent, naturally having a governmental position, Lord Chaitanya, he immediately saw through whatever material position was there, and he could understand that this is a very elevated devotee. And he became just by seeing Ramananda Roy for the first time, actually, it's described that Lord Chaitanya became ecstatic. But Ramananda Roy was in the company, being a governor. He had a royal party with him, a royal company, soldiers, secretaries, whatever may be there. And so Lord Chaitanya restrained his ecstasy. But later, and of course, they met each other, and I believe they embraced one another. But later, they re-met again on the Godavari, and the famous discussion, Ramananda Samvad, took place there regarding Sadhya Sadhan Tattva, the goal of life and how to attain it. So, in that conversation, you could just pull up this real quick so you have this, Madhya Lila 8th chapter. So you could go to the first verse, actually. You can begin from there. So, it's described here, Madhya Lila, chapter 8, first verse.
You were at 9. You went to verse number 3.
When you read Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's very beautiful, actually. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he begins every chapter with although the text is generally in Bengali, he composes each chapter a very beautiful Sanskrit text. So he says here, this is the Ramananda Samvad, the famous chapter. He says, Sanchari Rama Pida Bhakta Mekhi, Svabhakti Siddhanta Chara Mritani, Goradbhir Eter Amuna Vitir Nais, Taj Yadva Ratna La Yatam Prayati. Translation, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is known as Gauranga, is the ocean of all-conclusive knowledge and devotional service. He empowered Sri Ramananda Roy, who may be likened to a cloud of devotional service. This cloud was filled with the water of all the conclusive purports of devotional service, and was empowered by the ocean to spread this water all over the sea of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. Thus, the ocean of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu became filled with the jewels of knowledge of pure devotional service. Such a beautiful verse, actually. The English may not exactly do it justice because the poetic elements are kind of, it's something like when you explain a joke. So similarly, the explaining the poetry here is done in the English translation. But the original Sanskrit is so beautiful, and it gives you a glimpse into the poetic genius of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. So you can jump down to text, I believe it starts 57. So Ramananda Roy, actually, he expressed to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that he didn't quite know what the goal of life was, actually. But then Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he humorously actually asks Ramananda Roy to explain what is the goal of life and how to attain it. So the conversation begins thus, with 57, Prabhu kahi padasloka sadhya nirnai Roy kahi Swadharma charane Vishnu bhakti hoy. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ordered Ramananda Roy recite a verse from the revealed scriptures concerning the ultimate goal of life. Ramananda Roy replied, if one executes the prescribed duties of his social position, he awakens his original Krishna consciousness. I think I'll just skip over all the Bengali and Sanskrit here, just to condense it down. So this is an extremely famous discussion, this Ramananda Samvad. It begins from the, I don't want to say lowest level, but at least the lowest level, or the most basic level, how about that, of Vedic understanding of Vedic Dharma. And it goes all the way up to the pinnacle of the ultimate goal of life, as Lord Chaitanya says. So he starts from this point, that, and he quotes in the next verse, the famous verse actually, he says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu, is worshipped by the proper execution of prescribed duties in the system of Varna and Ashram. So everything Ramananda Roy is saying, he immediately quotes so many different verses to substantiate what he's saying, backing up for the Vedic literature. He says, so continuing, there's no other way to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One must be situated in the institution of the four Varnas and ashramas. So it's a direct statement of scripture, actually. It says here, there's no other way to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is this is the ultimate goal of life, is where Ramananda Roy begins. And Srila Prabhupada, he gives lengthy purports in this section, as well as there's other, you could say purports or more explanations that are given in the teachings of Lord Chaitanya as well in a condensed form. I'll just be kind of sticking to the translations. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he replied to this that this is famously, ehobhaya, this is external. You had better tell me of some other means. Ramananda Roy replied, to offer the result of one's activities to Krishna as the essence of all perfection. So first, I mean, most of us are probably hearing from Bhakti Vikas Maharaj, so he mentions this often actually, this ehobhaya. That Lord Chaitanya, bahya literally means external or outside, just like bahir nirsimha hridaye nirsimha. Nirsimha is outside and is also within. So similarly, Lord Chaitanya, he's saying this is, he doesn't reject it per se, what Ramananda Roy has said. He doesn't reject the system of Varnashram Dharma and executing that, being pleasing to Vishnu, but he says it's external. There are different levels of Vedic understanding. We can understand that even from going, the Vedas offer one thing. There's so many, the Vedas themselves, they have so many hymns and so many suktas and so many mantras contained within, but practically we don't study them at all. Because some things may be there, but we understand that generally the Vedas, Nistrayaguna Bhavarjana, that they deal with the three modes of material nature. So largely they're on the external platform. And the Vedas are meant more or less to somehow engage the otherwise envious conditioned soul, somehow within the Vedic system, with the ultimate goal, obviously, of coming back to Krishna. So it's there, and one follows the Vedas, he's following Dharma, but it's not exactly the highest thing. You can't say it's the ultimate goal of life just to adhere to the principles that are given in the four Vedas alone. So therefore, we have literatures like the Gita, like the Bhagavatam, and also the highest, topmost point of Chaitanya Charitamrita. And it could be said actually that Chaitanya Charitamrita is the crest jewel of all Vaishnava literatures. And this conversation here, it goes all the way up to the, of the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita, this conversation here, it goes all the way up to the top. In fact, just remember, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he would actually restrict his disciples from reading this chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita as they were studying it. So just side points. So he says, so there's externality. So it's not rejected. The Varnashram system isn't rejected. Sometimes you hear people explain that Lord Chaitanya, Varnashram isn't viable, and actually it's not Lord Chaitanya's movement. Lord Chaitanya's movement is the Sankirtan movement, and that Varnashram was rejected by Lord Chaitanya from the very beginning, starting this conversation. But it wasn't rejected. It was just said is not the highest goal. It can't be rejected because Lord Chaitanya, he himself he took the role of acting within the Varnashram system, of accepting the sannyas order. So just a side point regarding this ehobhaya, he says it many times. So then Ramananda Roy, he says to offer one's activities to Krishna is the highest goal. So it sounds very plausible. He quotes this verse from the Gita, Yad Kurushti Yad Ashnashi, that my dear son of Kunti, whatever you do, quoting Krishna, whatever you eat, whatever you offer in sacrifice, whatever you give in charity, and whatever austerities you perform, all the results of such activities should be offered to me, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, Srila Prabhupada, he says in this purport, basically saying this is there, and this is the beginning of devotional life, the beginning of bhakti, but it's not the highest point. As we often mention in our classes, there's different grades of devotional service. It's just as if somebody is executing some service, if the mentality, this isn't even exactly that. It's similar, but if one has a mentality of, I want to do this, and at the same time, I'm going to offer it to Krishna, that's there, but it doesn't approach the level of pure devotional service. So this is there, but still the next verse he says, Ehobhaya. This is again external. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, please proceed and speak further on this matter. Ramananda Roy replied, to give up one's occupational duties in the Varnashram system is the essence of perfection. So this Svadharma Tyaga, this renunciation is the ultimate goal of life. And he quotes here that occupational duties are described in the religious scriptures. If one analyzes them, he can fully understand their qualities and faults and then give them up completely to render service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he quotes actually Bhagavad Gita here. Sarva-dharma prityaja mamekam sharanam vraja aham dvam sarva papyebhyo moksha yishyami ma shuchaha. Abandon all varieties of religion, simply surrender unto me. Don't worry, don't fear, I will deliver you from all sins, do not fear. Quoting from Bhagavad Gita translation. So again, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he heard this, and again he said, again, Ehobhaya, this is again external. Again, after hearing Ramananda Roy speak in this way, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu again rejected his statement and said, go ahead and say something more. Ramananda Roy then replied, devotional service mixed with empiric knowledge is the essence of perfection. So I'll just read the translations. Ramananda Roy continued, according to the Bhagavad Gita, one who is thus transcendently situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. Brahmaputra Prasanatma. He never laments or desires to have anything. He was equally disposed towards every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. After hearing this, the Lord, as usual, rejected it and continued it, considering it to be an external devotional service. He again asked Ramananda Roy to speak further, and Ramananda Roy replied, pure devotional service without any touch of speculative knowledge is the essence of perfection. Ramananda Roy continued, quoting from Lord Brahma, he says, prayers in the 10th canto, my dear Lord, those devotees who have thrown away the impersonal conception of the absolute truth, and who have therefore abandoned discussing empiric philosophical truths, should hear from self-realized devotees about your holy name, form, pastimes, and qualities. They should completely follow the principles of devotional service and remain free from illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, and animal slaughter. Surrendering themselves fully with body, mind, words and mind, they can live in any ashram or social status. Indeed, you are conquered by such persons, although you are always unconquerable. At this point, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, this is all right, but still you can speak more on this subject. So at this point, he accepted what he didn't reject it as external, but he said, this is okay, but there's something more, prying more into it. Then Srila Ramananda Roy here replied, ecstatic love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the essence of all perfection. Prema Bhakti Sarva Sadhyasar. And he quotes like this, that's Ramananda Roy continued, as long as there is hunger and thirst within the stomach, varieties of food and drink make one feel very happy. Similarly, when the Lord is worshipped with pure love, the various activities performed in the course of that worship awaken transcendental bliss within the heart. And of course, that's a famous verse, Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Matihi. Pure devotional service and Krishna consciousness cannot be had even by pious activity in hundreds and thousands of lives, and can be attained only by paying one price, that is, intense greed to obtain it. If it is available somewhere, one must purchase it without delay. So Lord Chaitanya, I'll just stop reading from the chapter. I'll just kind of summarize what's going on next. So, he says here, hearing up to the point of spontaneous love, he says, that is all right, but if you know more, please tell me. And he continues to say more. So he's approached this point of prema bhakti, of love, pure love for Krishna, and he goes higher and higher and higher like this. And Lord Chaitanya pleads him or induces him to speak more and more and more. He goes up through, first beginning with the different rasas, Shanta ras, Dasya ras, Sakya ras, Vatsalya ras, and then ultimately coming to Madhurya ras, the highest point of pure love of God, and going even higher to the different levels of Madhurya ras. And then at the end of it all, Ramananda Roy, he is, well, first, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he glorifies him for teaching him the goal of life and how to attain it. But Ramananda Roy, he says to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, I'm just like your doll. I'm just like a wooden doll. Actually, you are speaking these things through my mouth. It is simply your pastime. And after this talk, Ramananda Roy, he famously received darshan of Lord Chaitanya gave him darshan of his actual form of being Radha and Krishna combined. And of course, most of us have seen that famous painting. Ramananda Roy sitting down with his hands like an expression, and then there's Lord Chaitanya, and then on two sides there's Radha on one, or Srimati Radharani on one side, and on the other side there's Lord Krishna. So Ramananda Roy is very fortunate because he was to my knowledge, there may have been others, but at least to my knowledge, he was the only devotee to have seen this actual form of Lord Chaitanya. Do you know of anyone?
I think it's just him.
I haven't read so widely in the biographies of Lord Chaitanya, but to my knowledge, this is the only instance. He's very, very fortunate. It's an extremely rare occurrence. So there's more that was spoken after this, but I'll touch on different aspects of Ramananda Roy first. So sorry for the reading. I know it's kind of hard to pay attention to, but this is an extremely important conversation, so I thought it was noteworthy to hear, especially for those who haven't heard it before. So Lord Chaitanya, most of us have heard this verse, Kipra Vipra, Kipra Nyasi, Shudra Kini, Noi, I think I'm missing a word, Jai Krishna Tattva Beta, Say Guru Hoy. It doesn't matter where, Lord Chaitanya, he actually spoke this to Ramananda Roy. That it doesn't matter whether one is a Vipra, a Brahmana, in other words, or a Shudra, if he knows the science of Krishna, then he is to be considered a guru. And he actually said this to Ramananda Roy before this conversation. So Ramananda Roy, superficially, he was coming from a Shudra background, I believe. But Lord Chaitanya, he didn't treat him like that at all. Instead, he accepted him as the topmost devotee. In fact, I was just learning there's one verse, Prahlad Maharaj says, Vipradvi Shadguna Yuta Aravindanaba Pada Ravindam Vimukachwapachambarishtam Manitad Arpita Manu Vachani Hitarta Pranam Punati Sakalam Napurimanaha. That if one is a Brahmana who has all 12 of the Brahminical qualifications, but is averse to the lotus, but is not a devotee, and is averse to serving the lotus feet of the Lord, he is certainly lower than a devotee who's even a dog eater, but who has dedicated everything, mind, body, words, activities, wealth, life, to the service of the lotus feet of the Lord. Why? Because such a devotee, he can purify his whole family, whereas the so-called Brahmana, puffed up by dint of false prestige, cannot purify even himself. So Prahlad Maharaj famously says this. And Ramananda Roy, he's not a dog eater, not to compare him to that, but he's an exemplification of the fact that a devotee excels any sort of smarta Brahmana, any Vedic Brahmana who isn't in adherence with the principles of devotional service. He was on a completely different level. So, and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he affirmed this to Ramananda Roy. So, and actually you see, there's another pastime, again very famous in the Antya Leela Chaitanya Charitamrita, that Ramananda Roy, Pradyumna Mishra, he approached Lord Chaitanya and he wanted the same thing. He wanted to understand what is the goal of life. He wanted to understand and just generally hear topics about Krishna from Lord Chaitanya. Who is more qualified than Lord Chaitanya to speak about Krishna, to speak on topics of Krishna? But Lord Chaitanya, he said to Pradyumna Mishra, you go to Srila Ramananda Roy and you hear from him, because there's nobody better than him in speaking Krishna Katha. So Pradyumna Mishra, he accepted the instruction of Lord Chaitanya upon his head, and he went to Ramananda Roy. And at the time, Ramananda Roy, he went to the household of Ramananda Roy, but he was busy. The servant said he will come soon, and we'll tell him he will come soon. But he was, so Pradyumna Mishra, he waited until the night, and still, I believe, if my memory is serving me right, Ramananda Roy didn't come, and then he came back the next day, and the same thing similarly happened. So Ramananda Roy, it's described there that, as I previously mentioned, he was qualified in so many aspects. He was a poet, he was expert in music, and he was specifically expert in drama as well. He had composed actually his own drama, the Jagannath Vallabha Nataka. This drama, actually, just a side point about this drama, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it's mentioned in the Antya Leela that there are different literatures, different songs that Lord Chaitanya would hear. He would hear Gita Govinda, he would hear the songs of Vidyapati, Chandidas, etc. like this. And he would hear this drama of Ramananda Roy to give you an idea of the status of Ramananda Roy. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself was listening to the drama he had composed. So, it's a nataka, in other words, it's a drama. It can be read, but it's actually meant to be as if a play. And so, Ramananda Roy was training various, they're called Devidasis. You could take it as female servants of Lord Jagannath who dance in the temple of Jagannath, how to enact this play, how to dance properly in front of Lord Jagannath, and how to do all the intricate motions in accordance with the instructions he had given. And so he was, it's written in that section, so he personally directed these extremely beautiful young girls in dancing, but he was never affected by their youthful beauty, as I read in this purport from Srila Prabhupada. He was personally showing these young women how to dance in front of Lord Jagannath, but considering these women as if, I think it's mentioned there, as obviously servants of Lord Jagannath, seeing them as gopis, he never felt any tinge of the motive passion of sex desire within his heart. And it's mentioned there, this is astounding actually. He personally bathed these girls, touching them and washing them with his own hands. Yet he remained calm and passionless, as a great devotee should be. And it's mentioned there that even though he would do this, he would personally bathe these Devidasis. It's said his mind was just like a stone. It wouldn't waver at all from the devotional service of Krishna. It wouldn't become inflamed by the motive passion at all. And then Lord Chaitanya, as he himself certified that doing this was only possible for a personality such as Ramananda Roy. And he said to Ramananda Roy that only you can understand your own mind, nobody else. So it's it's amazing actually that the caliber of a devotee of Ramananda Roy. Therefore, we see that the statement Srila Prabhupada actually not Srila Prabhupada's statement he's quoting, but Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he said that that Ramananda Roy, your renunciation is equivalent on the same level of Sanatana Goswami. Sanatana Goswami, we all know, he was living in Vrindavan. He was just coping. He was living under a different tree every day. But Ramananda Roy, superficially, he's the governor of Madras province. He's so wealthy, he has so many secretaries. But his renunciation is exhibited by this pastime. So this is what Ramananda Roy was doing when Pradyumna Mishra came. And so Pradyumna Mishra, so he was held up for a day, and then he came back to Ramananda Roy. And then, details aren't given, but then Ramananda Roy began speaking Krishna Katha to Pradyumna Mishra, and then so for the whole night actually, and then Pradyumna Mishra, he returned to Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya had inquired that, so did you go to Ramananda Roy? Did he speak some Krishna Katha to you? And then Pradyumna Mishra completely glorifies Ramananda Roy, because the same thing that was spoken to Lord Chaitanya was spoken to Pradyumna Mishra. So like this, even though Pradyumna Mishra, his name is Mishra, he's from a Brahmana background, Lord Chaitanya sent Pradyumna Mishra, who's from a Brahmana background, to Ramananda Roy from a Shudra background to learn the science of Krishna. So in so many ways, Lord Chaitanya proved this point of this Kipa Vipra Kipa Nyasi, whether one Shudra Kinenoid, that whether one is a Brahmana, a Sannyasi, or a Shudra, if he knows the science of Krishna, it doesn't matter. So, there's one other verse, or not verse, but section I want to read. If you can go to the same chapter, verse starting 244. So this is again a very famous section in the same. I believe it's the same Sambad. It should be considered the same Sambad section, but it's a question almost as if a Q&A session between Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Roy. It's very nice actually. It's very famous actually. Most devotees know this. That let me just pull it up. Sorry, it's a long chapter. I have everything pulled up. 244. So after their discussions, there's this Q&A session between Ramananda Roy and Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya was asking the questions, and Ramananda Roy, he was answering them, although according to his account, it was Lord Chaitanya who was actually answering them through his mouth. So, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked the questions, and Sri Ramananda Roy gave the answers. And this way, they're engaged in discussion throughout the night. So you can go to the next verse, 2, Konvidya. Yeah. So I won't read so much, but as to not bore people, but I'll kind of elaborate on some of these. So most of this are really, some of these are really famous. So on one occasion, the Lord inquired of all types of education, which is the most important? Ramananda Roy replied, no education is more important than the transcendental devotional service of Krishna. We understand this in so many ways. Rajavidya Rajaguhyam Pavitram Idam Uttamam. That this is the supreme education Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita. This system of Krishna consciousness, this devotional service of Krishna, and imparts real knowledge in so many different ways. Srila Prabhupada emphasized this. And that knowledge of the soul distinct from the body, that's real knowledge. In fact, in this purport, Srila Prabhupada says somewhere that material education aims at increasing the activities of material sense gratification. But beyond this material sense gratification is actual knowledge, which consists of knowledge on Brahmavidya, or knowledge, or at least of the impersonal transcendental knowledge. But beyond even that Brahmavidya is knowledge of the devotional service of the Lord. So this Paravidya, this higher knowledge that's given here, is the topmost form of all knowledge. So the next verse, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then asked Ramananda Roy, out of all glorious activities, which is the most glorious? Ramananda Roy replied, that person who is reputed to be a devotee of Krishna enjoys the utmost fame and glory. It's a fact. So many different of our classes, it's mentioned, so many different famous people have come and gone, and where are they now? Srila Prabhupada will say, what happened to Hitler, what happened to Napoleon, where are their empires, where is it all gone? But we see Prahlad Maharaj, he wasn't just existing some thousands of years ago, he was existing in a completely different yuga ago, and still his glories are being sung every single day. It's a fact that a devotee of Krishna enjoys the most fame, the most glory, even though he doesn't aspire for it. These materialists, but naturally they're aspiring for for name, fame, wealth, etc. like this. But a devotee, even though he doesn't care for such a thing, Krishna forces such a thing upon him, just as we see in the case of, our own Srila Prabhupada is an amazing example, Srila Prabhupada's glories, they should be sung at every single moment. You see what Srila Prabhupada went through to establish Krishna consciousness. And Krishna, he himself establishes the glory of his devotees. I think actually he's quoted here. No, I'm thinking of something else. There's some things that Srila Prabhupada quotes in the purport, but I don't want to get so much into that for sake of getting into the other aspects of the conversation. So yes, like this, a devotee is the most famous. Not only is he the most famous, his fame is eternal. His glories are eternally sung. Whereas Napoleon, he established France, and then, we learn about him in the history books. But what Srila Prabhupada did, what our acharyas have done, what these devotees have done, it's eternally established. It's eternally there. So, the next verse, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, of the many capitalists who possess great riches, who is the topmost? Ramananda Roy replied, he who is richest in love for Radha and Krishna is the greatest capitalist. So, it's a fact actually, that one who has attained this, just like we say, Harinam Sankirtan, Golokya Premadhan, this wealth of prema, this wealth of love of Godhead, this is actual wealth. Who is poor, who is actually poor, and who is actually rich? Srila Prabhupada answers this. He says, there's one quote by him, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement means to become compassionate to the poor people. Poor people means those who are poor in spiritual knowledge, Krishna consciousness. They're thinking they're very big men, but they're the poorest because they are losing the chance of understanding Krishna in this human form of life. They're thinking that this motorcycle or this big high palatial buildings and bank balance, big business profits, that is the aim of achievement. No, that is not the aim of achievement. The aim of achievement is atato brahman jigyasa, to understand Brahman. And they're not interested in that aim of achievement. Therefore, they're very, very poor. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission is to reclaim these poor human beings, those who are not interested in poor spiritual understanding. And again, another quote, a man who is poor in knowledge, he is poor. Otherwise, nobody is poor. Elsewhere, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he explained in relation to the Sarvagya, the astrologer, that it's that the living entity is just like a son of a very rich father, but he's completely forgotten who his father is. So every living entity possesses his father is incredibly rich, he's Krishna himself, and he himself is an heir to this very great wealth of love of God. So one who awakens this, he is actually rich. Whereas these other ones these materialists who may superficially appear so rich, actually they're incredibly poor by Srila Prabhupada's definition of the term. Because they've attained this rare human form of life, but they're just wasting it like anything. So the next verse, of all kinds of distresses, what is the most painful? What's the most painful thing in the world? Sri Ramananda Roy replied, apart from separation from the devotee of Krishna, I know of no unbearable unhappiness. It's a fact. Most of us have experience of this when we go away from the association of devotees from some time, visiting family or this. Even just being alone, it's like torture. You realize it when you don't have it. You realize the app when you when you lose a good thing, then you really come to appreciate its value. So separation of devotees is the association of devotees is so enlivening, and the separation of the devotees is so painful. Actually, just like we sung this Jayanilo Premadana Karuna Prachur, Narottam Dasi says I'll smash my head against the rock and I'll enter into a fire. So you can see that the moods and the of course that's transcendental. Separation for devotees, that's also transcendental, don't get me wrong. But you can see the intense pain that is felt, the stress that is felt. That although you can take the sum total of all the threefold miseries within this world, if you add them all together, still it doesn't equate to the separation one feels, the pain one feels in separation from a devotee. So the next verse, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then inquired, of all liberated persons, who should be accepted as the greatest? Ramananda Roy replied, he who is loved of Krishna has attained the topmost liberation. It's sung in so many different ways. Srila Prabhupada, he quotes here actually in the purport, Muktanam apisitanam narayana parayana suduram pashanatma kuitishvapi mahamune. O great sage, of the many millions of liberated persons, and of the millions who have attained perfection, he who is a devotee of Narayan is very, very rare. Indeed, he is the most perfect and peaceful person. So this is this point is sung again and again throughout the many different. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavatam says it so many different times. Chaitanya Charitamrita is there. It's practically understood at that point that a devotee, he's superior to so many different. Just like this Yene Ravindaksha Vimuktamani Nestvayastapavad Avashuddha Puriyaha, that one arises to this apparent Parampadam, the highest destination, but if they neglect the lotus feet of Krishna, they again fall down. So devotee is higher than even these. So the next verse, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu next asked Ramananda Roy, among many songs, which song is to be considered the actual religion of the living entity? Ramananda Roy replied, that song describing the loving affairs of Sri Radha and Krishna is superior to all other songs. So yes, these songs that are given by the Vaishnava Acharyas that actually, unlike mundane songs, which is just lyrics about just some nonsense or another, these songs by the Vaishnava Acharyas, not only are they very beautifully composed, the language is very elegant, the meter, or the tune is so nice to hear. The words themselves, they describe the dharma of the living entity. Just like, even this Bhagavad Gita, It's a song in and of itself. And elsewhere in the Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada also refers to the Bhagavatam as it's a hymn. It's hymns technically, and you can take it as a song. Srila Prabhupada refers to it as verses actually. He says it's a song. So similarly to this whole Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur once, in quoting the Chaitanya Charitamrita, he said the Charitamrita sings, and he quoted the verse. It's a fact. I mean, if you look at the verses, it's all the same meter that we sing. So all this literature is like that. They describe the constitutional position of the living entity. So I'm running short on time. Let me just see if I can power through these other ones. So I'll blaze through these and I'll leave some time for questions. Then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, out of all auspicious and beneficial activities, which is best for the living entity? Ramananda Roy replied, the only auspicious activity is association with the devotees of Krishna. Otherwise, everything just binds us to this material world. Next verse, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, what should all living entities constantly remember? Ramananda Roy replied, the chief objects of remembrance are always the Lord's holy name, qualities, and pastimes. Just like you were quoting Aradhanan. No. Smartavya satatam Vishnu, Vismartavya satatam Najatuchit, Sarve Vedi Nishedasyor, Etayor Eva Kinkaraha. At all times, the injunction, the import of all scriptural rules and regulations is that we should always remember Lord Vishnu. Oh, actually, again, for the Bhagavatam, he quotes here a similar one. Tasmat sarvatmina rajan, hari sarvatra sarvada, shotavya kirti divyascha, smartavyo bhagavan rinam. Another famous verse. The business of the living entity is to always remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead in every circumstance. The Lord should be heard about, glorified, and remembered by all human beings. Next verse. Out of many types of meditation, which is required for all living entities, Ramananda Roy replied, the chief duty of every living entity is to meditate upon the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna. He quotes again in his purport, Tasmat ikanam manasa bhagavan sattvatam patihi shrotavya kirtidivyashtadhya pujas nityada. Again, the same thing. We should always remember the lotus feet of Govinda. Next one. Where should the living entity live, abandoning all other places? Ramananda Roy replied, he should live in the holy place known as Vrindavan, or Rajabhumi, where the Lord performed his rasa dance. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, out of all topics people listen to, which is the best for all living entities? Ramananda Roy replied, hearing about the loving affairs between Radha and Krishna is most pleasing to the ear. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, among all worshipful objects, which is the chief? Ramananda Roy replied, the chief worshipful object is the holy name of Radha and Krishna, the Hare Krishna, the mantra. Hare Krishna mantra. So Srila Prabhupada explained that this, from the very beginning, Hare is addressing Radharani, and Krishna, obviously Krishna. So all that's there in the Hare Krishna mantra. And continuing, what is the destination of those who desire liberation and those who desire sense gratification? Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked. Ramananda Roy replied, those who attempt to merge into the existence of the Supreme Lord will have to accept bodies like those like trees. And those who are overly inclined towards sense gratification will attain the bodies of demigods. So those Maya bodies or impersonalists who are a spot that, just as I've quoted, Yene Ravindakshi Vimukta Manias, they go up to or they may not even go up actually. Sometimes they just may directly enter into the body of a tree. That's their destination.
Fantastic.
And Srila Prabhupada, a funny course is Trividya Mam Sumapa in the purport. Similar import. So I believe that's all there's more, but I'll kind of cut it short for leaving questions and answers. So yes, this is kind of like, today is Srila, his disappearance day. I don't know if his appearance day is on the calendar. I don't think so, to my knowledge. But so Srila Ramananda Roy is a very extremely exalted devotee. He's incredibly close with Lord Chaitanya. He spent so I was saying in the beginning of the class, he spent every single night with Lord Chaitanya. Every single night this conversation that I read, that not this Q&A, well, also the Q&A presumably, but these topics about Lord Krishna, every single night Lord Chaitanya, so Damodar Goswami, Ramananda Roy would engage in discussion about Krishna, discussion and topics about Krishna. Every single, and even more so, in the last 2 years of his life, Lord Chaitanya's separation from Krishna increasingly marked as described. And so Ramananda Roy practically he was always with Lord Chaitanya, always how to say, relieving him of his anxiety and separation from Krishna. So he's an extremely exalted devotee. We should all read and learn about him. Srila Prabhupada is given in so many different ways. I mean, just like he's so important, and even this conversation is so important that Srila Prabhupada's first book he wrote in the Bhagavad Gita is there, but teachings of Lord Chaitanya, he included Ramananda Samvad in there, and he gave everything in that Ramananda Samvad. Actually, it's shocking. That's one of the first books Srila Prabhupada published. There was Ramananda Roy, such an important devotee. So. It's 8:46, so I can end my class here. That's basically everything I wanted to cover. And I can open up for any comments, questions, or elaborations anybody wants to give at this point. It's working, it's just a little quiet.
So two things. One is this aspect of external, the varnashram being rejected. So I mean, so Chaitanya Mahaprabhu doesn't reject it in one sense, in another sense he does reject it. I mean, Prabhupada also uses that word rejection. But it's interesting to note that not only did he reject varnashram, he also rejected sarvadharman parityajya.
Yeah.
You see, and then yat karoshi adarshasi, and if you actually take this, if you actually analyze this and you ponder over it, if devotees want to claim, oh yeah, Mahaprabhu rejected varnashram, so we don't care about that, then you shouldn't care about collecting donations either, because what you're doing is yat karoshi adarshasi, is what you're doing with donations, is because people are unable to dedicate their entire lives, and so okay, why don't you at least give a donation to help support the movement? They're still doing it with okay, if I give to Krishna, then I'll get more money and things like this. Mm-hmm. You see, so you cannot. How do you? So then you should stop collecting donations. If you reject, then you must go all the way. It also means that you shouldn't have any wife or children or take care of anything, because sarva dharma just all dharma. Then you don't have anything to do. You don't care about the laws of the land. You don't care about anything. This is all like mundane dharma. Sarachara dharma. So that's one thing. It's a very silly. They like focusing on that one thing because it suits
their sense gratification.
But they forget everything else. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. Second thing.
Actually, just a quick thing. It's also funny that to substantiate, I think the jnana, like bhakti, jnana mishra bhakti, Lord Chaitanya quotes the Stani Stita verse. So they're very eager to quote that, which he also rejected, but they're very eager to dismiss the other one.
Yeah. And then the other thing I was thinking is here Ramananda Raya says that the greatest unhappiness is when one is separated from a devotee of Krishna. And when we're in the association of devotees, initially that's generally how we feel. Oh, wow, I just want to be with them. But then, what happens is if a devotee develops an offensive attitude, we had one male devotee and another female devotee go through this, this pattern where they start to fight and criticize and find faults with,
and hate the devotees.
With devotees. What happens is they leave the association of devotees or they get thrown out. And then what happens? Then, for all their criticism, they start to live like karmis. And that shows the effect of the fruit of the bad fruit of their offenses. Yeah. Because okay, if the devotees are all faulty and this and that, why do you start living like a non-devotee? Like, what happened to all that other philosophy? It has nothing to do with the devotee. It has everything to do with your life. You want to go back to Godhead, right? So you should be chanting Hare Krishna, following, everything and living like a devotee. But you don't. You connect this, okay, because I don't want to be with devotees. I'm just going to live. I don't care about devotees. They also connect devotional service with that, which shows what that offensive mentality does, is that, it messes, basically, Maya takes them, takes them away from the association of devotees and then throws them back right into the material muck,
What you're thinking the whole time is the association of devotees. That's the issue of my Krishna consciousness.
It's really dangerous, and therefore devotees should be very careful. It's not like, although we interact with devotees, they just look like normal people. They speak too loudly, or when they spend too much time in the toilet or whatever. It's like, you may have some small things, and you may consider them to be ordinary people, but actually devotees are not ordinary people. Devotees are very rare, they're very valuable, and we can see personally when our lives develop a little bit of offensive attitude, immediately affects our devotional service. So, and then we don't feel separation from devotees. In fact, it goes.
Wow, Jai, I'm not with the word.
Yeah, it's dangerous. The mind begins with the mind, actually.
Yes, sir.
It's a fact. It's not like an external thing. The mind begins thinking that, like, whatever, like, there's so many things. Maybe there externally there may be arguments or some disagreement with devotees, like exactly what you're saying. And so naturally, the mind starts thinking, why do I have to live with these people? I don't have to be here. I could practice Krishna consciousness on my own. And then, but that's actually the Maya. That's that gets you away from devotional service. Whereas all the Vedic literature, the Bhagavatam is, if you see the dealings between devotees and Chaitanya Charitamrita is so sweet and so relishable, and the association of devotees is glorified in so many different places in the Bhagavatam. I was going to read it, but just to cut it short, Dhruva Maharaj, he wanted the kingdom of Lord Brahma, and then what did he pray for actually? What was it Benedict? He wanted the association of devotees at the end of it. Why? Because, again, Prahlad Maharaj, he has another beautiful prayer. He says, my Lord Nrsimha, by engaging in your transcendental service and the association of devotees who are Hamsas, I shall completely become completely uncontaminated by the association of the three modes of material nature, and shall be able to chant the glories of your lordship. So it goes on like that. But in the association, the same thing, Satam Prasangam. And the association of devotees, all these things actually come about, and then you can actually elevate in Krishna consciousness to, like, of course, specific situations may be there, but just generally speaking, if you want to practice Krishna, you're living in a very great hallucination if you think you can practice Krishna consciousness separate from the society of devotees. Srila Prabhupada writes. So yeah.
I was seeing this, that one of the reasons why Ramananda Rai suggests, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya suggests to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to go meet Ramananda Rai is because before Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya became such a great devotee of the Lord, he actually always looked down upon Ramananda Rai, thinking, he's a Shudra, sentimentalist, always thinking about this, but does not have any real conception of devotional service. And when he finally arranges a meeting of both of them, he feels like his offense, went down. And I was looking for this picture. It's not such a good quality, but this is the painting from the Chaitanya Charitamrita of the devotees of Ramananda Rai meeting Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And all the brahmanas around them, you can see if you look at the painting, some of these brahmanas are sitting there wondering, what's up with these guys? Why are they doing this? Because Mahaprabhu understands they were brahmanas and they're thinking, why is the sannyasi
embracing a Shudra?
But it just shows how mundane this whole Smartha Brahmana stuff is. They miss the point altogether. And I was also thinking, he's Arjuna and Vishaka, and we can see why. Also because, when Krishna is there, outside of Vrindavan, Arjuna is his best friend. Mm-hmm. And so much that even in their past life, they were Nara and Narayana in their previous incarnations, They were so close to each other. And then you were talking about this famous painting. I wasn't able to find the one with Ramananda Rai, a good quality one, but this is like a similar one, where he's showing himself to be as Radha and Krishna. And in this pastime, he's serving prasadam to Lord Chaitanya, and he's unable to understand, why am I feeling so much attraction for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Why am I feeling? Is it because he's a brahmana? Is it because he's a great devotee and all these things? But I'm feeling the same attraction that I feel for Radha and Krishna. I'm unable to understand what's going on. And then Mahaprabhu, to pacify his mind, he says, I'm actually, don't worry, the amount of love you feel for me, you can only feel for me and for not anyone else. and he shows himself to be Shri Shri Radha and Krishna. It's a very ecstatic pastime, you know.
Does it happen in some speciality?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen at the end of Ramananda Samvad?
Not.
I thought it would, but my
I
knowledge
think
is
it happens. It also happens when he's serving in prasadam. That's for sure. Even if it
It's
happens,
described like that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita.
or the Chaitanya Bhagavat, one of the two. I need to not Chaitanya Bhagavat, but like I'll
Maybe
pull it
somewhere
up.
else, because in Chaitanya Charitamrita there's only one instance.
And it's the end of Ramananda
It's the
Samvad.
end
You're
of
sure?
Ramananda Samvad. Yeah.
yeah, the painting's there. There may be some other instances.
Yeah. I'll try to pull that up. You know, but it's very ecstatic. You know that even if it's not you while he's serving him prasadam, still the
Yeah.
fact is that the attraction you're feeling for me, you can only feel for me. You know, and that don't get confused about this. You know that this is just me, and he shows himself to be Shri Radha and Krishna. He's completely amazed.
Yeah.
You know, and in one of these purports that you read, Prabhupada said that one must get a PhD from Ramananda Roy. You know, we should get a PhD from Ramananda Roy, not from some donkey.
Anything from the Mataji side? Yes.
You got it.
It's not. Is it on?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just a little quiet.
It's not a question. It's just more of a comment. In my understanding of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and this whole exchange is very limited. Actually, not so much, but it's just interesting if Ramananda Roy is a manifestation or incarnation of Arjuna in this particular life. Just thinking about how Krishna and Arjuna, that exchange was Krishna, speaking to Arjuna, and in this sense,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Ramananda Roy
Yeah.
is the one who's, giving this dialogue to Krishna, to Lord Chaitanya, even though Lord Chaitanya is speaking through him.
amazing.
The difference in exchange is really nice.
Yeah, Srila Prabhupada actually says, and it's interesting, I never thought of it like that. Srila Prabhupada, he says in Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, I think, that the Chaitanya Charitamrita begins at the point that the Bhagavad Gita ends. So the Sarva Dharma Prityaja, which is actually mentioned in the same conversation. From that point, then Chaitanya Charitamrita, and consequently you could take Ramananda Samvad as well, they begin from there, they go higher like that. So yeah, that's a very interesting point.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So similarly too, I was thinking it's a little more esoteric, but so Ramananda Roy is either the Shaka Devi or Lalita Devi, and then you see that Lord Chaitanya, he encouraged that Srila Rupa Goswami, was a Manjari obviously, to approach Ramananda Roy and recite his two dramas actually to him. And then Ramananda Roy, he asked how do the actors enter all these technical terms and everything. It's interesting how you can see the two intertwined. So, anything else from the Mataji side? Questions or comments? Yes.
What is it? The Chaitanya.
Chaitanya.
Yes. The chapter 8, verse 70. It's so the wording is so interesting, and I'm just fascinated by this, but I'm kind of remedial, so I don't understand it. It's the last part where it's the whole thing is a pure devotional service cannot be had even by pious activity in hundreds of thousands of lives.
Yeah.
And it can only be attained by paying one price, that is intense greed to obtain it.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah, it's a very famous verse.
it's
Very significant verse actually.
is it saying that pure devotional service, if you don't have the intention, it doesn't have value? Or
Yeah. Yep. I mean, yeah, it could be taken like that.
I'm trying to read the other verses around it to give it context, but I just wanted to make sure I got the grasp on it. 'Cause it's
Yeah.
very interesting.
But this is a very significant verse actually. It's quoted in I believe Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu as well.
Yes.
So basically just simply put, in the progression of devotional service, there comes a point where the living entity develops a very intense greed to become Krishna conscious. And there's I just say it's almost as if I'm not Krishna conscious. I have to become Krishna conscious. That intense greed awakens within the living entity. When that greed awakens, then it's almost as if rocket fuel for one's devotional service. So it's basically kind of in simple English what this verse is kind of like saying.
That helps a lot. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
I'll take one more. You have something?
Hare Krishna. So like, if you start to like fall away from devotional service, like you no longer want to like chant and do the right thing, is it probably because you made many offenses? And if so, like, how do you come back from that? And can you come back from that?
Yeah, generally, I mean, practically, it's how do you come back from that? Is it due to offenses? Yes. Even if it looks like somebody superficially leaves on their own accord, generally, that situation is created because of offenses. If that makes sense, like somebody wants to move out of the ashram and start like whatever, like working a job, making a business. So generally, and he's consequently falls away from devotional service. It could be seen as unfortunate. At the same time, it could be seen due to offenses. That situation was arranged by Krishna or Maya due to offenses. But at the same time, even if we go away, there's one verse, Tatanite Madhava Tavakat Kvachit Prashanti Margat Vaipadasuredaha, that even if a devotee falls away from devotional service, Krishna doesn't forget him. He continues to traverse upon the heads of his opponents, and Krishna eventually Ananya Pak, that he quickly becomes righteous and like that. So how do we come back? Well, the main thing actually is if we go back in the association of devotees. That's like the main thing. If we keep in the association, if we don't reject the association of devotees and become envious of them, then there's hope, because in the association of the devotees will try and correct whatever misconceptions or whatever sort of hang-up, so to say, maybe there in somebody who's gone away. Whereas somebody who's gone away, they're not going to the temple, they're not hanging out with the devotees. It's very difficult for them to come back. So we should always keep friendships and relationships with devotees. So, yeah, go ahead.
So there's two broad categories of offenses. There's offenses to the Supreme Lord, and then there's offenses to devotees.
Yeah.
So both offenses can lead one to leave devotional service, but the category of offenses to devotees is more severe. Like, for instance, one may, due to weakness of heart, one may commit offenses in devotional service by not following the four regulative principles or something like that, out of attraction to sense gratification. But not that he's envious of devotees, not that he dislikes devotees, but it's just that, you know, they still have some attraction for sense gratification. And that's offenses to, you know, to the holy name and things like that. But in that offense, they're not envious of devotees. They may sometimes feel ashamed of coming in front of devotees or things like that, but in their heart, they still desire that they want to be in the association of devotees, but sometimes they may feel like, I'm so fallen, I'm just like, I'm too attracted, I'm too, you know, like this. So those people, Krishna blesses them with extra mercy. Of course, they go through some suffering also, but they have a lot more hope. But the latter category, where the devotee develops a very a grudge against devotees, they develop resentment, they develop hatred toward devotees, it's very difficult, because here they're attacking people who are dear to Krishna, and Krishna doesn't take that very lightly, you know, and it becomes very dangerous, you know. So that can take a very long time, and very, very long time, depending on who the offense, what category of Vaishnava is offended.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki